going on, everybody? It's Sean, back with GeekWaresASMR. Tonight I'm bringing you part 2 of the No End House. A lot of people actually don't know that there is a part 2 and even a part 3 to this story. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the story. It had been 3 weeks since I heard any word from David. In the 6 months since we started dating, we had only gone 3 days without talking, and that was after a pretty intense fight. There was nothing out of the ordinary when I talked to him last. He had just mentioned that he was going to check out something a friend told him about, but then I got a really weird text the night before. It was from David, but it wasn't from his number, and it only had 5 words. No end. Don't come. David. Something was wrong. After I read that text, I felt nauseous. It was like seeing something I shouldn't. I decided to get a hold of Peter, but I hadn't talked to him before. He was a deadbeat, but at least he might have some information on where David might be. I decided to log on to Aimee with David's account. I figured it would be easier than starting something with Peter if he didn't know me. When I logged on, he immediately messaged me. David, holy crap, you had me worried. I thought you went to the house. What do you mean? No End House, man. That place I told you. I could have sworn you said you were gonna go. No End. This guy knew what was going on. Yeah, I actually couldn't find it. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. Where was it again? No way, man. You had me worried. Screw that place. I've been there, and you don't want to go there. Peter, this is Maggie. Wait, what? Where's David? I don't know. I thought you would know, but apparently not. Crap. Oh, crap. What? Seriously, Peter, you need to tell me what's going on. I think he went to the house. I'm outside of town, maybe 4 miles down, on Terrace Street, unmarked, turn right. Crap, man, he's gone. No, I don't think he is. Well, what are you planning on doing? I'm going to get him back. I left the next night at around 8. There wasn't a single car the entire trip, and as I turned onto the unmarked street, I saw a sign pointing down the road. No End, this way. Open 24 hours. My breathing had been steady since I left the house, but seeing this didn't help. There weren't any other cars around, which made me think that it wasn't open. A light from the front stoop illuminated the surrounding area, and the windows showed that lights were on inside. I parked my car, walked up to the front, and made my way in. The front lobby was normal enough, but as I predicted, there wasn't anyone there, and all those lights were on, but no one was inside. Besides the door I came through, there was only one other. Posted next to it was another sign. Room 1, this way. 8 more to follow. Reach the end, and you win. That wasn't what made my stomach sink. That wasn't what stopped my heart. There's more, scrawled down at the bottom, and handwritten in dark red. You won't save him. I must have stood in that lobby for an hour. I wasn't frozen. I didn't know how to go on. Did I go through the door? Did I call the police? After reading the sign, I decided that I may have bit off more than I could chew. I'm average height for a girl, but I'm pretty thin. I wasn't about to fight off some psycho that was holding out David hostage. I decided calling the cops was the best thing to do. So I reached into my pocket, opened my phone to call. No service. The house must be blocking the signal, and it was basically in the middle of nowhere. I walked toward the entrance, figuring I'd find service outside. I reached the knob, twisted, and nothing. It was locked. I shook it harder. Still nothing. It was locked from the outside. I slammed my hands against the door and called out to anyone that could hear me. I knew it was useless. No one was out here except me. I felt a vibrate in my pocket. I reached down and looked at my phone. One had unread text. At first I was glad I had service. I was saved. Maybe the text was from David, that he was alright. It was from a different number. One I didn't have saved. I pressed open and nearly dropped my phone. You cannot save yourself either. My entire body was shaking. I wanted to pass out. I was stuck there. A cell phone with no service, in a room with no exit. My eyes scanned the room and landed on the door across. A gold 1 was mounted on the front. It looked like a room door in a hotel. The ground felt far away as I walked closer to that door. In a few moments, I was well within inches of it, and I placed my head against the wood and listened. But all I heard was distant Halloween music. Just creepy instrumental music you'd hear at any haunted house. Suddenly, I got a little calmer. David was known for his pranks. He would tell me about these elaborate setups he and his friends would make for the new players on their soccer team. Somehow, a smile found its way onto my face, and I opened the door without any fear. Entering the first room alleviated my fears even more. The room was completely normal. An attempt at a haunted house, though rather lacking. In each corner was a scarecrow, but not even scary ones. They were the kind you used to see in grade school with big smiling faces. Paper ghosts hung from the ceiling, and a fan in the corner added a cool breeze that made them spin. Next to one of the scarecrows was again the only other door in the room. Printed on the front, similar to the first door, was a large 2. I laughed and left this lame room behind me. When I opened the door to room 2, I couldn't see 3 feet in front of me. It was completely filled with gray mist that smelled like rubber. I guess there had to be some sort of fog machine in here, and it must have been pumping this stuff for hours. There were no windows in the last room, so the ventilation must have been terrible. I walked slowly forward and let out a small shriek. I'd bumped straight into a large, robotic Jason Voorhees. His eyes flashed, and the knife in his hand went up and down in a jerky stabbing motion. My heart was racing, and if anyone was with me, I would have felt incredibly embarrassed. I covered my mouth and made my way past Robo Jason. The fog was getting to be a little much. I began to feel lightheaded when I finally found the door to room 3. I placed my hand on the knob and jerked it back in pain. The knob was extremely hot. I placed my hand on the door itself and felt that it too was warm. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. I put my ear up to the warm wood, expecting to hear fire, and heard nothing. I assumed that it was just warm, like they were pumping heat into the final room in the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. I took the corner of my dress and wrapped it around my hand, turning the knob as fast as I could, and I flung myself into room 3. There was no fire, just darkness, and it was freezing cold. However, room 3 wasn't like the other rooms. It wasn't like the other rooms at all. At that moment, I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to make out anything in the room, but I couldn't even see my hands grasping for the doorknob that now wasn't there. I was trapped. I must have been turned around in the darkness, even though I didn't move once I entered and had gotten turned around. At that moment, a light on the ceiling flashed on, a single spotlight pointing directly down, illuminating a small table. On the small table was a flashlight. Even though I couldn't really see where I was going, I moved forward. The light on the ceiling was enough to make my way to the table. As I reached for the flashlight, I noticed a small tag attached to the handle. To Maggie, from management. The moment I finished reading, the light above me turned off, and I was again left in the dark. I fumbled with the flashlight for a second before I was able to turn it on. From what seemed like every direction, a low and rumbling hum surrounded me. My heart was pounding, and I started to spin in place, darting the beam of flashlight all around me. There was nothing in here, but after a while, I noticed something terrifying. It could have been my imagination, but I could see a figure dart out at the last second whenever the beam hit it. I began to panic. I started backing away from the small table, unsure which direction I was going. The hum was getting louder, well up with tears. I thought I was going to drop the flashlight. I was shaking it so badly, until I saw it. The light set directly on the small number 4. It was written on a piece of paper and taped to a wooden door in the corner. I ran as fast as I possibly could with the flashlight pointed directly in front of me. I could feel it behind me. The hum was getting louder, and I thought I felt its breath on my neck. I was sprinting at this point. In one motion, I grabbed the handle, twisted, and slammed it shut behind me. I was now in room number 4. It was outside. I wasn't in the house anymore. What awaited me after opening of the door to room 4 was what looked like a cave. I looked to the ground, and I noticed something strange and disturbing. The ground wasn't made of rock or dirt. It was made of wood paneling. It was the same floor as in the previous rooms. This was room 4. I was still somehow in that house. There were a few torches mounted to the side of the rock surrounding me, and the cave beyond was pitch black. The torches looked like they could have been taken down, so I walked over to the closest one and unsheathed it from its mounting piece. My body was covered in sweat, and I slowly made my way into the cave. The hum was gone, hopefully for good. No other noise met me outside the cave, but there was a slight breeze. The cave seemed to go on forever, and I was walking for what felt like hours until I saw a faint blue light. I walked towards it cautiously, but at a decent pace. The light was opening the end of the tunnel. I started walking a little faster. I always hated cramped spaces like caves and tunnels. In a few moments, the exit was within feet, and before I knew it, I was at the end. And that's exactly where I was. The end. At the exit of the cave, the ground dropped off a cliff, and there was no other way to go. I looked back into the dark cave behind me. I knew there wasn't any turns. It was a straight tunnel. I turned and looked over the edge. What I saw made my stomach worse, and a turn worse than it ever has before. What I saw was an ocean. Water all around, with nothing in sight. The drop must have been 100 feet, with a small rock formation at the bottom. After a few seconds of studying the rocks, my stomach turned more than I thought possible, and my body broke into a fresh sweat. The rocks formed a number. The rocks formed a 5. I stood up and backed away from the edge. I hated heights. I was stopped by a wall that shouldn't have been there. I turned around and was met with a terrifying sight. The cave was gone. place with a solid stone wall, the side of whatever mountain this was. I had to keep telling myself I was still in the no-end house, that I didn't leave. Clearly this isn't an actual mountain, but it felt so real. I turned back and looked over the cliff again. There's no way. This house has been pretty messed up before now. I was outside. It didn't make any sense. But what it expected me to do now was just too much. I knew what those rocks down there meant. They were the entrance to room 5. There was no stairs. There were no other paths. I was trapped. Again. The house wanted me to jump. The house wanted me to jump. I sank to the ground and curled into a ball. I couldn't do it. There was no way. I couldn't jump off a cliff onto a jagged rock formation 100 feet below. My mind was split in two. I knew that I was still inside, but my surroundings screamed the opposite. After what seemed like weeks, I finally stood up. Slowly, I made my way to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The giant 5 taunted me. I knew I couldn't do it. And it still taunted me. But then the hum returned. The low and distant hum. It seemed to come from behind me, resonating within the mountain. I didn't know what came over me, but after hearing that sound, something inside me lit up. I clenched my eyes and jumped. The wind was rustling as I fell. A deep fear washed over me. I was going to die. I was going to smash into those rocks and die. They were going to tear me apart. I didn't dare open my eyes. I just fell. Even with the loud wind around me, the hum was now deafening. I just wanted to be over. I just wanted to hit the rocks, and I wanted to be over. And then I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore. But I never hit the rocks. I closed my eyes and looked around. I was standing on the familiar wood paneling of the house. The hum was gone, and the silence took its place. I'd made it. I was in room 5. I didn't know, but the feeling of dread was just gone. I don't know how it happened, and I was just incredibly happy to be alive. After a few moments to collect myself, I decided to look around at the rest of the room. My happiness left me very fast. The room was heavy. The walls matched the floor, and the ceiling matched the walls, and the walls had no doors or windows. I was in a sealed box. Then I realized I didn't make it. I wasn't safe. I'd made it out of the 4th room, only to enter the 5th. There was no leaving it. At that moment, I wondered if David had been in this room. I wondered if he had jumped off that 100-foot cliff and ended up stuck in the room. And if he did, how he got out. He wasn't sure. I wasn't sure, but he wasn't here. I was alone. He got out, though, and I would too. The thought of David escaping this room gave me newfound confidence, and a second wind filled my spirit. I was getting out of this room. I was going to find David, and I was going to get us the hell out of here. I walked around the perimeter of the wall and felt for any sort of inconsistencies. Nothing. The walls were flawless. Barely a scratch on them, let alone some secret exit. I started to knock at random places on the wall. They were completely solid. The confidence started to leave me. I was running out of ideas. And that's when she spoke to me. "Maggie, you shouldn't have Maggie. I nearly jumped out of my skin if it was possible. I was still facing the wall, and the voice had come from the middle of the room. The voice of a little girl. At least that's what it sounded like to me. I turned around, slowly, and my eyes fell on what spoke to me. And I was right. A little blonde girl, no more than 7 years old, with light blue eyes and a long white dress. She smiled at me and spoke again. But now that you're here, let's play a game. There was something horrifying about this little girl. She wasn't scary like those horror girls out of Japanese movies. She looked completely normal, as if I saw her walking down the street. I would have just walked right on by, but looking into her eyes, I felt complete terror. Jumping off the cliff was scary, but I would jump off 20 cliffs, twice as high, if I could take back 1 minute of looking into those black, soulless eyes. After a moment of staring, I finally spoke. What game? Who are you? If you lose, you die. And if I win, he dies. My heart sank somewhere below my feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I knew she was telling the truth. Which will it be? She smiled. Neither. I don't know where I found the courage to talk back to this demon, but I had come too far to let David die, and if I died, then it was all for nothing. No, I choose neither. But then I saw it. The reason that little girl terrified me. She was more than just a small child. Looking at her, I also saw what appeared to be a large man, covered in hair, with the head of a ram. It was a horrible sight. I couldn't see one without seeing the other. The little girl stood in front of me, but I knew her true form, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. Too bad. And she was gone. I was alone again, in an empty, silent room. Only this time, something was added. A small table where she stood appeared out of nowhere. Just as though it was there the whole time. On it was a small razor, one that you might find in an X-Acto knife. I reached out and picked it up, and as I did, a scream left in my mouth. When my hand came into view, I saw something that was never there before. It looked like something branded into my skin, a single number 6. I looked back into the razor and noticed a tag attached to it. To Maggie, from management. Thought you might need this. After reading the note, I started to sob uncontrollably. Tears were rushing down my face harder than they ever have in my life. I'd never cried like that, and don't think I ever will again. I fell to the ground and sunk my head to the hardwood floor. I was sobbing for hours, just lying there on the ground. And then the crying stopped, and the depression set in. I didn't even know why I was crying. It wasn't about David. It wasn't that I was stuck here. There were still no doors in this room. I was still trapped, but that's not why I was sad. It was the deepest depression possible. Complete and emotionless depression. I felt empty. I clawed my way up from the ground and steadied myself against the table. My eyes fell on the razor. I picked it up. I was going to kill myself. I couldn't handle it anymore. I'd had it. David was likely dead, trapped somewhere in this house. It was over. I pressed the razor against my wrist up right above the 6 that appeared on my skin. The sobbing came back and I just stood there, crying with the razor pressed against my skin. David was dead, and I was going to die. Nothing mattered anymore. And with one deep cut, I sliced my arm. Immediately after slicing down, I was no longer in room 5. And I didn't die. I know that for sure. The depression was gone, but I was by no means happy. Tears were still finding their way down my face. The room was similar to the one previous. Again, it had no doors. There weren't any lamps, but somehow I was still able to see everything clearly. The room was completely empty. But before I had time to think of what to do next, it went dark and the hum returned. I covered my ears in protest. It was louder than ever, but it was over in a moment. The lights returned, only this time something was added to the room, and I screamed. In the middle of the room, strung up by chains and naked from the waist up, was David. It looked like he was tortured. Knife wounds littered his chest and arms. "David," I shouted, and I ran up to him as fast as I could. He was conscious. I saw his chest move up and down, but he wasn't speaking. That's what I noticed, what was etched in his chest. I dropped to my knees as I saw it. The 7. I heard David try and speak, and I got to my feet and got to as close to him as I could. David, can you hear me? Maggie, what are you doing here?" His voice was slight, but he was talking, and I was thankful. "David, I'm trying to save you. How do I get you down?" There were padlocks on the chains holding him in place. I looked around the room for a key, but there was nothing there. So, as the metal was way too thick for a knife, so I disregarded it. I went back to David and thought that it looked like he was on the verge of death. Then I felt my pocket vibrate. It startled me. I took my phone out of my pocket, as I suspected, one unread text. I flipped it up in the phone. That isn't me. I didn't know what to think. David was here in front of me, but that text was from the first number that contacted me. This is the first text I had received from David that mentioned the no-end house. "Maggie," I heard his voice clearly in my ears and in my mind, and it seemed like his voice was coming from all sides. "Maggie, you have to go on." "What are you talking about? How?" I was face to face with David, or whoever it was that was chained. That knife. He made a slight movement of his head towards the corner. "Go get it." I ran and was back immediately with the knife clutched in hand within a few seconds. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I would do anything to save him, and I would do absolutely any. Now stab me in the chest. Wait, what? I was shocked. David hung there, staring directly into my eyes, seeming to gain his strength. "You have to run that knife through the 7 in my chest. It's the only way to save us both." "No, you're not making any sense." "Maggie!" He was screaming now, his eyes frantic. The sides of his mouth curled into an unnatural twisted grin. "Maggie, stab me now. It's the only way." I looked at the knife in my hand. My head felt as though it had been struck with a bat. I was completely at a loss. I clenched my eyes shut and felt the knife in my hand. "Maggie!" And with a scream and a thrust, I stabbed David in the chest. I don't know what came over me. I just know that it was the only way. I opened my eyes and saw his face. It was terrified. Tears slid down his cheeks, and David looked me in the eyes. Why did you do that?" He couldn't fool me. I knew that wasn't David. It couldn't have been, or else I wouldn't have been able to stab him. I know it isn't. I know it wasn't. His eyes rolled back as the life had left him, but that's when it changed. The 7 on his body was gone. The blood dripped onto the ground into a pool below me. The crimson liquid stretched out in every direction. The circle nearly filled the room, and I began to sink. The blood was my knees now. As much as I tried to struggle, I just sank deeper and deeper. Above my chest, I clawed and scratched at the wood around me. The lifeless body of David hung above, his head facing me, smiling. The blood reached my neck. I was beyond terrified. Before long, I was fully submerged and fell into darkness. When I woke up, I was outside the house. I could feel the cold earth below me. I rolled onto my back. The now-in house towered above me, complete with my car parked in the same spot. I wasn't sure whether I should laugh or cry. There's no way I escaped. The house wouldn't let me go. Something wasn't right. I knew it. I knew I didn't kill David. I know I didn't. But he was nowhere to be found. I reached down in my pocket and took out my phone. No unread messages, but I had service. I turned it on and began to text David. "Where are you?" I wrote. Within a second of sending it, I got a reply. I pressed open excitedly. "Room 10. You're in room 7. Run!" And the deafening hum returned. I bolted. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wasn't outside. I was still in this house. The hum rattled around me. I shook the trees and air itself. I needed to find an 8. I needed to find the next room. It was my only chance. The first few rooms were obvious, but as I progressed, it was getting less and less clear where the rooms started and ended. I had no idea what I was looking for. Anything with a number on it. I needed to find an 8. 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 I needed to text message. Your address. What the hell does that mean? My address. I slid my phone back in my pocket. The hum was growing louder and louder, and that's when it hit me. My address, it couldn't be. 4896 Forest Lane, Unit 8. I slammed into my car and flung the door open. The hum shook the metal of the car and seemed to follow me inside. I floored it and made my way back down the dirt road to my apartment. None of this was making sense. How was room 8 my apartment? Should I have trusted that text? Was it from David? I know it was. I know there was no reason to trust it, but I took no time at all and drove to my complex, and honestly, I don't even remember driving. It was like when you zone out for a minute and wake up further down the road. My complex was huge, but my apartment was one of the first ones on the left. I ran as fast as I could, past 4 and 5, my head spun, and it felt like it was weighing me down, like a lead vest. I passed 6. The further down the hallway, the further the hum seemed to be. Past 7, and finally, the small gold 8 was at eye level with me. I reached for the doorknob, slid my key in, twisted. The door swung open, and I was sucked in like a vacuum, the door slamming behind me. Room 8. I got up off the floor and looked around. It was identical to my apartment. I didn't know any better, but I would have assumed that I was home and that this was a bad dream. My mind went to David, and I wondered what room 8 was like for him. I walked around and studied the area. Literally everything was as how I left it. My monitor was still on and Instant Messenger was still up and running. I walked over and sat in front of it, scrolling through my conversation with Peter. It was there, word for word. The house knew all of this, and how, I had no idea. To be honest, I tried my hardest not to think about it. The answer, no doubt, was something better off not knowing. I tried to click out of it. Click out of the instant message, but it wouldn't let me. The computer froze. I clicked shut down, but nothing happened. Control-Alt-Delete, and nothing. I pressed the monitor's power button. Nothing. Then a pop-up message appeared on my screen. It was a video chat. It looked like a list of people in it. And there were 2 names. Maggie and management. The video feed was live, and all it showed was a gray wall. Then a message from management popped up into the text box next to the stream. Hope everything is how you left it. Smiley face. Who are you? I responded. Enjoy the show. Smiley face. That's when the camera turned. The camera focused on a young man strapped to a surgical table. He was completely naked and sobbing to himself quietly. The image wasn't clear, but I thought I recognized the man laying there. He was tall, short brown hair, and fairly pale complexion. This is what happens to people who attempt to cheat. Smiley face. Then I realized who it was. Strapped to the surgical table was Pt.2, and he wasn't alone. I don't want to describe what I watched at that moment. The screams, the sounds that Peter made were unlike anything I'd ever heard of a human. I couldn't look away. I wanted to, but I think it was the power of the room that I couldn't look. Peter let out one final soul-curdling scream, but I didn't hear it through the computer speakers as it was coming from the room. My heart sank as I spun around. I got up off the chair, and I could still hear the screams emanating as I walked towards its source. I reached my bedroom door, and the screams were now replaced by the hum. It haunted me the entire time. I slowly opened the door and saw inside my room what I had seen on my computer. There was a surgical table, with whatever was left of Pt.2 strewn across the top of it. No one else was there. The others in the room were gone. But a chill went up my spine. Management was here, with me, and only one room away. With only one room away. I walked up close to the table. The stench was horrific. I took everything in me to stop from vomiting. I knew I was nearing the end. I had to be. I looked around the room, and somewhere there was an entrance to the next room. I knew it had to be. And it was. But it was simpler than I had expected. Across the room, where my bedroom or bathroom door should have been, was a simple wooden door. Similar to the early ones in the house. Something was stapled to the door, something long and bloody. It was the entrails of Peter, and they formed a 9. I felt bad for Peter, but I had gone through hell that night. I walked right past the table and picked up a surgical knife without giving the body a second glance. The final door was there. I walked right up to it. This was going to end, and I was coming out of that room with David. I was going to stop whatever it was from keeping him there. The end was here. When the door opened, it resembled a waiting room of a doctor's office. There was a few chairs lining up the wall, crumpled magazines in a basket in a corner. Against the room, on the opposite side where I came in, stood a single door. My heart sank when I read the label printed on the door. It wasn't a number, but a word. Management. I clenched the surgical knife in my hand. All right. I'm freaking ending this. There, on the other side of the door, I could feel it. David was too. The hum was louder than it had been before. I felt it inside of me. It was coming. As I walked, it got louder, and as I placed the hand on my door, the room was filled with the sound. I turned the knob and opened the door. The room waiting for me was not what I expected. It was the front lobby. The same front lobby that began this entire hell. Only this time, there was someone behind the desk. My heart jumped out of my chest when I saw who it was. It was Peter. Hello, Maggie. Peter, There's no way. How? Who are you expecting? A ghost? Satan? Some creepy little blonde girl? He was smiling. I wasn't. What the hell is going on here? Maggie, come on. Just think for 2 seconds. Who told David about this place? You didn't. Who told you about David's whereabouts? Peter, you were his friend. I'm sorry, Maggie. But that's how we run business here. Where is he? Where is he? He's here. With us. In this house, Maggie. And he isn't going anywhere. And neither are you. I don't know what took over me, but I lost it. I jumped over the counter and shoved Peter to the ground. I grabbed him by the hair, slamming his head into the ground over and over. The surgical knife in my other hand pressed firmly against his neck. I wanted to kill him. I had to kill him. He killed David, but he wasn't killing me. Meghan, you can't. There has to be someone to run the house. No! I slid the knife across his throat and slammed his head further into the ground. I don't think there will be. With his death, the room went dark. I could still feel the surgical knife, but I was no longer holding onto Peter's hair. I don't know for how long I was in the darkness. It felt like ages. I stood and felt for the desk, balancing myself on one hand. Then the lights came on. I could see the windows across the room. It was still night out. I looked out and saw him. David was walking around outside, seemingly unharmed. I ran to the door and tried to open it. I was so happy. But the door didn't budge. I tried my hardest, but the door wouldn't let me out. I looked out the window and saw David as he began to walk down the dirt road. I rested my head against the door and saw it. My stomach lurched, because there pinned to my chest was a name tag with one word: management.